Of the early internet stories, there are few as infamous as the Final Fantasy house. Though the details are unclear to most who remember it, its reputation is still sometimes invoked on forums in reference to terrible housemates or the eccentric potential from online communities, especially fandoms. What's more, it was one of the main channels through which internet users were introduced to the otherkin phenomenon. So what was the Final Fantasy house? On April 18, 2005, a LiveJournal user under the handle of GenkiCraft made a long, scattered post detailing an experience with specific fans of Final Fantasy VII, a popular and influential story-driven game from Japan. He introduced it not a joke. This is my experience with them. He began by explaining his place within the fandom. Quote, most people watching the journal now probably don't know this, but back in the day, I ran a pretty popular website devoted to the characters Cloud and the very minor character, Zack, from Final Fantasy VII. It was really the only comprehensive one out there about the two, which was why it got such notice. I was used to receiving fan mail or other people's fan art, which I'd put up on the website. Unquote. At the time of his alleged experience, he explained that he was a college freshman and a heavy drinker. In 2002, he was contacted by a person calling herself Hojo, referencing the mad scientist villain from the game, and the two began conversing with each other occasionally over AOL Instant Messenger. Hojo had her own fan site dedicated to her namesake, and following the same pattern, she began calling the writer Zack after his site. At the time, he thought nothing of this. Sometime after, he was introduced to Hojo's wife, who went by Genova, or Jen, after an ancient evil and alien creature from the game. The writer describes their first encounter online. Quote, then came a good old bombshell. I was asked if I had any memories of past lives. I do believe in past lives. I think it's a pretty valid cycle given how many cultures believe in it. So I told her no, I didn't, but I did believe in it. I should never, ever have said that. It was like inviting the vampire into my house. Jen's attack was swift and sure. She began in a flurry explaining things to me, how there are alternate universes. Do you grant me that? Sure, there could be. And in those universes, maybe, just maybe, video games actually happened. I thought it could be plausible, because I like imagining anything's possible. Through all of this and all this flurry, she tells me that she thinks in a past life, I was Zack from Final Fantasy VII. Think about it, she said. You're both country grown. You both have that instinct of dragging off friends who could be left behind. You'd take a bullet for someone, right? You say you don't believe in magic or any of that, and he wanted to be a mercenary. For all of his 5 or 6 lines, you have a similar speech pattern. You even live in a basement like he was locked in one, and you hate it. Addle your brain with freshman idiocy and vodka, and this will suddenly make sense. Sure, maybe I'm not him now, I said, but it was possible. Unquote. The writer agreed to meet them in the town of State College, Pennsylvania that winter to stay at their apartment a week before Christmas. He was met at the bus stop by Hojo, wearing a lab coat, who escorted him back to where they were living. Quote, when we arrived at the apartment, Jen, who insisted I call her Genova and would often refer to herself as Jenny Nova, came storming up to Hojo and I, screaming in Hojo's face. I have no idea what it was about. She was wearing a purple skirt pulled up around her breasts. It looked like she had just got out of bed, and I was, to say the very least, ever. Whatever she was mad about was out the window. About this time, I started to realize, though, Jen wasn't role-playing when she talked about her children and other selves. Jen is what the internet calls a soul bonder, or in other words, batshit loony. She believes she has a lot of people living in her head talking, and when she wants to take on a personality that best fits a situation for her personal gain, she acts one out. I.e., if she wanted to get sympathy, she would raise the pitch of her voice and pretend to be an innocent child. Unquote. Despite these occurrences, the writer's overall experience was positive, and he would frequently return for visits, each time paying $300 for a bus ticket. With every visit, he would meet someone new, many of them soul bonders themselves. Jen would frequently ask for money to buy food, and the writer would relent, feeling a sense of obligation. She would also attempt to help the writer and others grow more attached to whatever Final Fantasy character she had assigned to them. This was achieved through various means, including pantomimed magical battles and a past life regression involving laying on the floor and listening to music from the game. In one instance, on a trip to the college, she and Hojo locked the writer in a soundproof room past the point of panic to help him, quote, remember being Zack. Another time, when meeting someone soul-bonded to the character Eris, Jen attempted to coax them into sleeping together. To this end, she announced that she was going to lace their food with aphrodisiacs, but whether she actually did so or not, her demands were not realized. As strange as these instances were, however, they were not enough to dissuade the writer when Jen and Hojo proposed that he move in with them. The writer moved into the State College apartment in the summer of 2003, food and rent, and he quit drinking as well. But his experience quickly degraded.
So,
Quote,
this is like a documentary about a thing called the Final Fantasy House, where people, one specifically is kind of behind all of it. They think that there are these things called soul bonders, where in a past life in another universe they were a video game character, and it's it's really fucking bizarre. But basically, this person is a very manipulative person who's trying to get these people to believe that they are in fact video game characters in reincarnated into who they are now. It's fucking wild.
I can't even say what came first, chicken or egg, but let's just say that after 1 week, I was getting sick of it. I was the workhorse. I guess because I
Can you
was
hear it
Zack,
okay?
I was therefore the manly man, as opposed to Jen, the Cetra queen, or Hojo, the frail scientist. Jen quit her babysitting job and refused to look for another one. I was the one who had to carry groceries to and from the house, the one who made the money to feed everyone, the one who had to fix or move furniture when it needed to be fixed or moved. My computer could rarely get online because Jen was on almost 24/7.
And so the guy who is the guy who's reading this is the YouTuber. He's reading the journal of the guy who was told that he is Zack from Final Fantasy VII, and how he's being manipulated by the people who think that soul bonding is real, and that they're video game characters reincarnated. And his like story about how he went to live with these people at their place called the Final Fantasy House, and how crazy and manipulative and disgusting these human beings are.
Of the time, she would watch me as I typed, so I could never make a journal entry that read something along the lines of, "Jen is abusing me, help me God, I'm tired and I want out of here," unquote. Jen's pattern of surveillance worsened quickly. She would always be listening in on calls, reading his online interactions, and demanding to know wherever he was going to keep track of him. She would frequently wake him up in the middle of the night for sundry magical errands, depriving him of sleep. She demanded he spend his meager paycheck on $10 steaks for dinner, which made him sick, and when those would only last one night, she and Hojo had him ask for unsold
Get rid of
food
him,
at the
Scepter.
supermarket. Nobody in the apartment would take out the garbage or clean besides the writer, who only washed the dishes, and so the stink festered in the apartment in the hot Pennsylvania summer. Jen only wore a single dress and refused to bathe, opting instead to use scented oil. The writer described the smell in
Thank
the
you.
apartment as rotting flesh and a miasma of filth with Sparkle Sunshine Fairy artificial sugar scent sprayed over it.
Oh,
What's
God.
more, Jen and
I know
Hojo
that
would
smell
beat each
well.
other loudly and with increasing frequency
Unfortunately.
behind their bedroom door as the summer continued, each time followed by noisy sex. This pattern of starvation, sleep deprivation, surveillance, and social isolation eroded the writer's will, and he began supporting them blindly. For example, while the writer was staying there, Eris grew tired of Jen, and the two had a falling out. The writer described the aftermath. Quote, "Apparently, Eris called one evening when Hojo and I were at the used bookstore, stealing books, yes, that poor, and said she wanted some of her things back that she had left at the apartment. Jen exploded. She called Hojo's cell phone in tears, screaming she was going to kill herself. I believed it. Hojo called Sid and demanded he go over. Hojo called Eris and screamed at her. I told her off too. We rented a taxi with money we didn't have and raced home. Jen, who had been screaming she had slit her wrists, was sitting in the middle of the floor. Sid was draping damp cloths on her wrists. I woke up for a second and knew this was bullshit. I had a problem with self-injury, so I knew very well the sight of a deep cut and the sight of a light cut. I know well knife wounds. Jen had scratched herself, horizontally on the wrists. Maybe it had been with a safety pin or a butter knife. It was not any kind of suicide attempt. At the most, it would sting. But I was still mad at Eris because I was supposed to be. I wrote her nasty emails. I joined them in bashing her. I ignored her when she came to pick up her stuff, even though she obviously wanted to still be friends with me. I regret that now because we never reconciled then. Maybe if I had got a clue and tried to get out with her, things would have turned out different. Unquote. Soon he was left with no money to leave and no confidence to ask for help. Even when he attempted to talk to his father at a payphone,
Life has always
Jen
been
would go
wild.
hunting for him. Then, when the filth in the
Damn
apartment
right.
grew unbearable, Jen and Hojo asked their landlord if they could move to a smaller, single-room apartment, further increasing their proximity.
Can you
The
guys
writer
hear it
was the
okay?
one to
Just
eat
making
the
sure the
boxes.
audio is good.
Soon after the move, the supermarket cut the writer's job to 1 hour a week. But even so, Hojo took all of them out to buy new things for the apartment, implying that she had been hiding money away in order to make the writer pay for things. Here, as they did many other times, they fought publicly. However, there was one person from the circle of friends in town who had consistently helped to stabilize the writer's mental state, a person who went by Sid, also a name from Final Fantasy, though the author describes him as having, quote, 1 foot in reality. He wrote, Sid occasionally would come over. When he did, I was glad because it was someone else. But he was and still does
Okay, cool.
have his dickish moments. Jen would make these the be-all end-all, and Renee would back her up. I began to think he was like that all the time and didn't want to hang out with him when he was gone. Once he came back, they had to restart the process of brainwashing me. Inspired after someone had stolen his shoes, he left everything behind in the apartment and walked the streets barefoot. By the end, he had spent a total of 2 months living with Jen and Hojo. After being homeless for a few days, Sid helped him gather his things and returned to his mother's home in Brooklyn. Besides his own account, the writer spoke of a few others involved with Jen specifically. One account was about someone he referred to as Captain McCool, a sensitive person with whom they sought to fill the vacant spot that the writer had left. When they asked him to move in with them, he was too nervous to turn them down directly, and so he claimed that he had been assaulted to avoid it. When they discovered his lie, they, quote, had him stuck in a chair and forced him to watch while they raped each other.
What the
Another
fuck?
person, whom he referred to as Bean, would sell her blood to help fund Jen's lifestyle. At the time he was writing the LiveJournal post, she was still living with them, but stayed in the attic and was forced to remain as quiet as possible.
Oh my
The writer
god.
expected some people in the Final Fantasy community to see this, but he couldn't expect the sort of attention it would receive.
It's insane.
Word spread quickly about the LiveJournal post, and many fans of Final Fantasy, as well as Soul Bonders, commented that they had heard some details about Jen and the group in State College, but hadn't known the extent of their behavior. Others who already knew her found these claims unsurprising. Beyond the community, however, this story gained interest on forums, including 4chan, who treated it with disgust and fascination. It was soon adopted into general knowledge as a way to reference poor living conditions
Final
and Soul
Fantasy
Bonders,
Plasma.
a subsection of a group known
Sell
as
your blood
Otherkin.
for me
It was
so I
here
can
that the infamous story
keep
earned
being
its
a
generally
fucking
recognized
degenerate.
name and misnomer. The Final Fantasy VII House, or
Yeah.
often just the Final Fantasy
Final
House.
Fantasy
Though
House.
the rest of the internet would sometimes question its veracity,
And the
writer's account
fucked up
seemed
thing
generally
is,
accepted
I
within the
actually in
Final
high school knew some people like this. I never really got that much into it, but yeah, it's crazy.
Fantasy community. He began to receive testimony from other people affected by the group, many of them people he had met during his time at the apartment. To share their correspondences, he created a website where he cataloged the accounts of those who approached him alongside his own. Due to the limited archival information available, it's difficult to say the rate at which he updated the site with new accounts, but it appears he was receiving them as late as 2006, with each person represented by a pseudonym. Some of these accounts were from people mentioned in the original LiveJournal post, and they helped elucidate the practices of the group and enunciate Jen's and Hojo's behaviors. These accounts
Maverick,
suggested era
thanks for the membership,
amateurishness,
bro.
Yet charisma to everything Jen
Welcome
did.
to the
For
true
example,
subscriber
one account
crew.
From someone going by Zarla wrote, quote, "There were also tarot card
Love you, buddy.
readings and such while we were there. Jen had the same tarot deck I had as a kid, the Tarot of the Cat People, and she told
That's
my
quite the
fortune
entrance,
using the
Maverick.
exact same method
Busting
outlined
out
in the
a
little booklet
membership.
that came with the
That's
cards.
classy, bro.
I can't remember anything really specific about the readings, except there was always mention of something coming after me or something, thus the coughing. If I remember
Yeah, you would
right,
hope
later
people
we
would
were
grow
playing
out
with
of
a
this
Ouija
phase
board
like
and that
the phase
something
like
or
this.
someone
Yeah.
was again trying to contact
Nope.
us.
There's people out
Unquote.
there to
These
this day
accounts
that
would
are
also
like this still
unanimously support
in their
the
like
assertions
40s.
about Jen
I
being
guarantee
the
it.
original writer. One of the oddest entries, however, was an open letter prefaced by the LiveJournal writer. Quote, "The following was taken from the Wayback Machine. It is posted without consent of the original author, and I want to make that damn clear. She has nothing to do with it being here, so don't involve her. It is being backed up here due to the
YouTube
fact that
purgatory.
it contains some current information that I
It's,
felt should be edited
nice
out,
and quiet
with
as
names or
usual.
references to other people uninvolved. As far as I know, the original author is now happily farming turkeys in Idaho.
We're just watching
Don't
some
hassle her. This was
psychopaths
written in
who think they're
2000.
video game
The
characters.
article itself is apparently written by another active member of the soul bonding community, though clearly no longer associated with Jen, under the pseudonym Candy Wrapper. The introduction to the letter reads, "Genova, when I became your apprentice, you told me to shut up and not argue with you. Apparently, a sorceress is supposed to be a creature who blindly accepts the opinions of the authorities, even when she firmly believes that they are wrong. From this, I learned that when
What?
Jen says something I disagree with, I need to nod and make agreeing sounds anyway. Otherwise, we would have to fight every 2 minutes, and quite frankly, saying what I thought wasn't worth the hassle. I am not, however, your apprentice anymore, and I am free to say what I think. And I will, because it's a relief to say it, even if you aren't reading this. I do not actually give a crap whether you read it or not. It will hurt your feelings, and you will care that it happened, and I don't. You have been warned. The letter Cornet." End of story. She shared some of her thoughts on Hojo and her relationship with Jen. If Renee does not go to class and do her homework, it will be difficult for her to pass those classes. Then she is no closer to graduating. Until she graduates, it will be hard for her to get a job that makes more money than she gets now. This is called capitalism, and it's a bitch. No one likes it, but no one has come up with anything that works any better. Renee always has to call off work or skip class to give you attention. She does this because she loves you. Love makes people do irrational and reckless things. This is one of them. That does not make it a good idea. You are wrecking Renee's life. It is wrong to do so, even if you have her permission. A few other
Yeah,
choice
seriously.
lines read, "You have no money because you keep spending it on things you want. Anything you want is not automatically a magical item. There may be potential magic in everything, but then there's magic in things you don't bother to look at, things you can have for free. If something is a magical item, that doesn't mean you must own it. It would be nice if you could, but you can't always do so. I had money because I rarely bought anything for myself. Whenever I got some money, I would save it. I am not a money generator, and neither are my parents. If you want to have money, you need to not spend it. I now do not have money because I spent it on you. Poof, all gone. You still wanted more, but I didn't have any more to give you. I have been using crystals since I was 10 years old. You are wrong when you start with that "you won't use them properly" shit, because I have been using crystals since elementary school. You taught me no magic. The only thing I actually learned from you was to beware of people like you. But among these
Ooh.
accounts, there was one that stood out from the others, and if
This
it's
guy's
to be
spitting
believed,
fire.
it showed just how far the manipulation of Jen's entourage could go.
It's fucking crazy. These people are nuts.
In November of 2005, the LiveJournal writer entered email correspondence with a woman who went by Mela. Mela had apparently known and bonded with Jen in a Utah boarding school, and rediscovered her online through an open letter. Though the quote in the email isn't quite the same, it's highly likely that the letter Mela discovered was the list written by Candy Wrapper. Hoping to reconnect, Mela asked the author of the letter for Jen's information, and sometime after, she visited Jen's residence for 2 weeks. Here, she claims Jen was able to convince her to spend $2,000
Oh, the
on
crystals.
various objects and food by asking only for
I don't
small
know.
amounts.
Crystals
at a
are
time.
weird. You never know.
Sometime
They might have
afterward,
powers. Who
likely in
knows? It's all what you
2005,
believe in.
Mela made the decision to begin living with them. Quote, "I moved in with $17,000 in my bank account, and soon Jen had drained all of that on necessities, all for the house, many of which went into Jen's room and never came out. Soon I received a check from the investment company for $80,000, and Jen's spending began again in earnest. I tried to get her to stop spending money on frivolous things, but every time I said no or told her she should spend her own money buying things for herself, she threw a fit. All this time, she was telling me how important I was to her special plan, how the world needed us to stick together so we could conquer evil, etc. I wanted desperately to feel special. I was scared and alone, and I believed her. She knew a few magic tricks, was very good at reading people, and could give relatively accurate tarot readings. I fell for her lies, hook, line, and sinker." Unquote. After she moved in, it was clear that Hojo's relationship with Jen had deteriorated, and she had been supplanted by a new person named Angel, whom Mela claimed was remarkably violent. Jen was now sleeping exclusively with Angel, though sometimes Hojo would sleep with Angel as well. Hojo was forced to stay extremely silent during the day.
Yeah, you mean
or
they
risk
use
being
quartz
berated
to
by
set
Jen.
frequencies,
This
so there's
information
something
strongly
to it. Yeah,
suggests that Hojo
I
was the
know
one who was selling blood
quartz
to
can
fund
like
Jen.
hold
Their hygiene
certain
was
amounts
also
of
still
data,
abysmal.
which
Quote,
is
"Oh,
pretty
how
cool to think
Jen
about.
Smelled. Angel was much worse, though. I don't think that girl ever bathed. They just kept adding perfume. And Jen's purple heaven, that was until I made her other clothes to wear." Jen, during this time, was apparently made aware of the LiveJournal writer's website as well. At some point, it appears that they moved somewhere new, and it was here that she claimed she was beaten on multiple occasions. Once, during a dispute, one of them grabbed onto Mela's hair and started slamming her head into the floor, while Jen and Angel beat her with their fists, then sat on her and attempted to choke her.
What the
Finally,
fuck?
she passed out from the head trauma. Jen would later convince her that she had attacked Jen first, then blacked out. Eventually, Mela would tolerate no more, and she kicked them out. Much like their apartment, the house was left a mess, which Mela documented with photographs. They also had stolen numerous objects upon their departure, including board games, fabric, and a set of corsets, though her demand for back payments of rent, quote, "in excess of 10K, is suspiciously inexact. While this account is consistent with other reports of the group's behavior, there was no method by which anyone could verify the veracity of any of them, instead leaving only the word of the writers. Alongside this, the author would finally reveal the faces of Jen and Hojo. In the frequently asked questions section, he wrote, "Is this photo Vincent/Jen/Hojo? 90% of the time, no. This was Jen in 1999. She got fatter and dirtier. This
wow.
was Renee in 2000. She looks the same." In response to this attention,
Jen character's
and
kinda
Hojo
cute,
began to
but-
frantically delete most online, and even with their names publicly available, nobody could find them. After this, the attention on these stories began to wane. But only a few years after the accounts were posted, the Final Fantasy house would return in a way that nobody expected and, at first, seemed entirely unrelated.
This needs to be made into a movie. I mean, technically,
On July
like
15th,
the
2008,
concept. Yeah, that
live
would be
stream
interesting.
user by the name of Dragon Tiger Claw wrote a post
That would be
entitled
really
Insane
interesting.
Housemate Part 1 and published it on Housemate Horror, an open, moderated page where people could share their stories of bad roommates. The opening reads,
This one is
quote,
definitely
"I
one of my
used to live in an
favorites
awesome
of
situation
what this
in
guy has done
SoCal
down the
until
rabbit
the
hole
housemate
series
from
or whatever.
hell moved in. Fortunately, she has left, but the bitterness remains on my tongue. It is a saga that can only be told in pieces. Please bear with me. In the cut, you will find part 1 of the saga involving the girl who believed she was a video game character." Unquote. Soon, the author would name himself as Pete. The tale was structured in irregularly sized sections, with many of them ending on.
I wonder if
explained
he
that
has
was
these
living
linked
with
in the
5 other
description.
people in a He claimed that
Damn.
the rent was a preposterously low $500
I would
a
love
month,
to just
and that the landlord,
take
Matt,
a
kept it
day
that
and
way
just
because
like
his
sit down
chief
and read
concern
all
was
of
that
these
he
live
wanted company
journals.
in the house he had inherited. However, his standards for roommates were high. They all had to have stable income and employment and be at least 25 years old. The woman who was chosen after their screening process was kept anonymous by Dragon Tiger Claw and was given the placeholder name Sarah, who moved in without much trouble. She claimed to be a 27-year-old computer programmer who already had a job in the area, but when she went back to work after the move, she returned saying she was laid off. When others offered to help her find new work, she consistently delayed accepting it, which made them suspicious. But much more striking was her connection to a particular game. Quote, "In the 3 weeks that followed, Sarah was still unemployed. She spent all her time playing video
Same,
games
dude.
in the family room. She
People
would play the
dig,
same
dude. They do
game
some good
over and
jobs.
over, some crappy-looking RPG from the 90s. It had an unpronounceable name, but Sarah said she was bonded to the game. She also told us that she changed her name to be that of one of the game characters. Upon further discussion, she explained that she believed she was the human incarnation of this character and that they shared a soul." Unquote. Pete refused to reveal what character she was claiming to be, however, since it would be identifying information. This game would, in the second update, be revealed to be the Japanese RPG Suikoden, released in
Great game.
1995. Soon afterwards, a friend of hers came to visit the house. She also believed herself bonded to a Suikoden character, specifically Sasarai, but since Pete could neither spell nor pronounce it, he simply called her something. After spending a week together playing video games, they picketed a barbecue that the rest of the housemates were having. Though they had been given vegetarian options to join, they refused on moral grounds, denouncing them for eating meat. After they were aggressively told off, they were asked for a house meeting, which took place in March, to discuss whether or not Sarah would be allowed to stay. Sarah attempted to explain herself. Quote, Sarah lifted her head and started to talk. She started with, I am sorry, but you have to understand where I am coming from. She also said, lots of people can't understand me because I have such a high intellect, it is beyond their grasp. Excuse us for being sane, bitch.
Wow.
Unquote. They eventually learned that she had used friends' help to get past the screening process. She had never had a job in California, was from the East Coast, and used a friend's address to get a California driver's license.
Zet
while
and
another
Pelly
posed as
Gaming,
her
what's
boss.
up, man?
Matt allowed her to stay until May 1st, since she had already paid for April. Sarah, however, wasn't willing
What's
to leave
good?
so easily.
Watching some weird shit.
By this point, numerous readers had become enraptured, begging for updates to what they had come to call the Sarah Saga, and many returned daily in hopes that a new part would be posted by Pete. In response to the pressure from Matt and the rest of the house, Sarah isolated herself in her room, with Sasarai acting as a go-between. She would only leave it in Sasarai's company.
Yeah,
However,
so
this
just
didn't
a
last
quick recap, Zet, if you don't know what this is, it's called the Final Fantasy House, and it's about a group of people who claim to be soul bonders, who think that they were in a past life a video game character in another universe, and they're reincarnated into who they are now, but they still think that they're connected to a video game character that was a thing in a reality somewhere in the past.
long, as Matt
It's a-
was
it's-
able to
it's a
pull
tale as
favor
old as
from
time.
a psychologist friend to get her treatment for free, and he managed to convince Sarah to attend. Soon, she was on medication and was interacting with the others on a more normal basis. It was during this time that they discovered Sarah's true form of income. Quote, she said, plain as can be, I have people offer me donations on my blog so I can spread the news of my religion. Her religion being that she is actually a male video game character from a game that came out in the 90s. What? So there are some morons out there who are
What?
giving money to Sarah so she can pretend to be a video game character and teach others how to do the same? Something said,
I believe
"We
it.
give her things because she has helped us find our true selves." So you don't work either, Tim asked. I could tell he was ready to explode. No, I get government benefits in the UK. Why? Because I don't like to work. Soon after this, Sarah's boyfriend convinced her to abandon her medication, and the results were violent. After one of the ruder housemates demanded she start taking the pills again, she began smashing fragile objects, including a window. People continued
That's
to
what
take her
Scepter
pills
said,
regularly,
Ark.
but by this point, interaction between her and the rest of the house fell to a minimum. By the time May 1st
No,
came,
people
there was
are
no
still
sign of
like
her
this, I
moving out,
promise.
and when Matt attempted to evict her, Sarah called the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, claiming discrimination against her religion and her disabilities. While the state didn't follow through on these threats, they did discover that Matt had never filed the correct paperwork
Time
to house
travel
tenants,
video?
and Matt couldn't evict her until the proper paperwork was filed. But
What
the
time
strangest
travel
event
video?
would happen that summer. In July, Sarah gathered 12
Are you
members
talking
of her
to
soul bonding group
Ark
at the
or
house
Zet?
to perform a ritual, threatening Matt that she would file a discrimination suit against him if he wouldn't let them stay. Though Matt acquiesced, he only allowed them to stay until 10 o'clock that night. One roommate demanded that the soul bonders be ejected, but Matt wanted to gawk at their ritual, and so they stood in the kitchen and ate pizza while watching them. Pete describes the ritual. Quote, Sarah came downstairs, dressed in a white dress. She kept glancing at us. Something stood between her and us so she couldn't see us, I guess, and she began talking. She talked about how this was Betty's awakening, and how Betty was now going to finally realize her potential by harnessing the soul of a video game character. I couldn't stand it. I started cracking up. The rest of the housemates started cracking up. This was better than any kind of TV you can imagine. See if you can picture all of these nutjobs kneeling around the altar as the video game played its music in the background. Sarah stood
That
over them,
8-bit music.
preaching this religion, and the right bishop something would occasionally interject something deep from her position. Sarah was really getting upset, so more of her friends made the human wall. We could still hear all the stupid, even after they turned up the volume on that video game. At this point, Matt threatened to call the police since it was nearly 10 o'clock, but when one of the members of Sarah's group threw a punch,
But
the threat was
that
carried
guy
out,
on the
and
internet that
group
said he was a
forced from the
time
premises.
traveler? I don't think I did a video. I never did a video on that.
After this point, other members of the house would share some of their experiences, but as they did, readers grew more suspicious. Before this, many people had been doubting the veracity of the claims made by Pete, but when the other housemates began to write in a similar fashion to him, it has been brought to my attention that a post was made by someone who was claiming to know Sarah, and that the posts made by DTC were false and harassing blah blah wah blah. This same person, Jay Eckhart, sent me an email before they made that post, requesting IP address information on the poster of the Sarah stories in order to catch the culprit making these false and harassing posts. I declined, as I do not think giving out personal/identifying information
Maybe,
such as
it's
IP
possible.
addresses on members of my community
Maybe that's my
without
next video.
information is really a good thing to do you? Also, I have no proof that this person is really representing Sarah or that the posts made about her are false.
Yeah,
No
I don't
proof
think
that
it
they
was
are
me.
true either, but until I get proof either way, I think the best thing is to not take any drastic actions. They requested I not tell DTC about them contacting me, and I intended not to, simply because it was the most neutral action to take, but then they made that post and made their intentions public. So I feel fine with telling you all, including DTC, about the email now. But meanwhile, elsewhere on the internet, other people were having their own discussion about the Sarah saga, and they would quickly discover much more than they first expected.
Man.
August 19th, 2008, a member of the Something Awful forums named Jabberwock posted a thread entitled, "If You Thought Furries Were Bad," which linked to the 11 parts of the Sarah saga that had been posted so far. The responses seemed mostly to reflect amusement, though quite a number of forum members echoed the doubt displayed in the comments of the posts themselves. One user, however, who went by Jägerhunde, had a different response. Quote, "I haven't read through the journals, I only started the first, but I swear this could be about a girl I knew and even once dated in that really vague, sad high school nerd way. She claimed that she was soul bonded to the Eris character from Final Fantasy VII, that her girlfriend was soul bonded to Sephiroth, and she swore at one point with perfect seriousness that she was carrying Sephiroth's spirit child.
What the
Apparently, she
fuck?
conducted an elaborate fantasy life with these characters in her head and had written pages upon pages of god-awful fanfiction about it. So far as I know, she grew out of it eventually, but when I say eventually,
I
mean
love me
like
some
late 20s.
trashy
Even when I knew
fanfic.
her at 16, this kind of behavior from her made me want to stay far the fuck away. Oh yeah, the girl in question also changed her name to some bullshit nerd fantasy name she made up and absolutely refused to ever be addressed by her birth name. After reading through the rest of the entries,
Sephiroth's
Jägerhunde
spirit
returned the
child.
next day
She's
with a
carrying
new
it.
post that took the other readers aback. Pretty sure I've got this all sewn up, goons. Allow me to introduce you to Catherine Rain. By pure chance, Jägerhunde had been in a small writing club in
Pretty
high
good
school
cosplay.
with Catherine, and still knew her Flickr account, her DeviantArt account, and her LiveJournal account. They also discovered the Flickr account of someone cosplaying as Sasarai, who had numerous pictures of both herself and Catherine. One of these images credited her as Catherine Silverberg, Silverberg being the surname of a family of characters from Suikoden, known for their tactical prowess in war. Other photographs had Catherine in a white dress, something that Sarah had worn in the Sarah saga. But the most telling piece of evidence Jägerhunde discovered was legal paperwork of her name change. By searching for her name in the county archives, he was able to discover her court schedule for when she legally changed her name. Though the accounts of Pete and his housemates were still doubted, the identity of Sarah seemed almost certain. They also were able to track down the website that this soul bonding community was using to proselytize
Mr.
curious
B, what's
internet
up?
users. Another person rediscovered the pamphlets that they would hand out at
I'm pretty sure
conventions.
everyone loves
Part of it
shitty
reads,
fanfic.
"The runes are devoted to preserving the natural order of life. While it can't be denied that their
Sephiroth
bearers
is
have
a
often
spirit drinker.
experienced great hardship
Yeah.
as a result of bearing the runes,
How do you
we
think
know
he-
that
he-
this is
he
due to inexperienced
made that
bearers,
spirit
no
child?
magical training, suddenly and unexpectedly receiving the runes' gifts. With no knowledge of how to live in harmony with these
Long story
powerful
short,
entities, they can't
don't date
control the vast
cosplayers.
forces raging in
Am I
turmoil
right?
inside themselves. But if people were taught to listen to and understand the runes, we could have the healthy, positive relationships with them that we were always meant to have. The end of the pamphlet encourages
These people are
readers to
crazy.
contact Bishop Sasserhaus. Jägerhunde made another assertion, that Catherine had also been deeply involved with Jen and Hojo. He believed that she was in fact both Candy Wrapper, the person who had written the list on the website, as well as Eris, the apprentice that Jen had lost. Catherine had also been attending the University of Delaware during the events of the Final Fantasy House, only a 2-hour drive from
Shit,
State College.
fanfic in
It appeared
'97.
after
That
these two distanced themselves from one another,
that is-
Catherine began her own
that is a
soul-bonding
spicy
community based on the
meatball.
Suikoden games, gathering followers over the years. Though the evidence linking the two
Okay,
was
I'll put the furry doc
circumstantial,
on
the
next. I was
specificity
actually
of
gonna
it
do
left
that.
little doubt, and this revived interest in the Final Fantasy House enough that new people were again discovering it. On August 22nd, just 2 days after Jägerhunde had posted about Catherine, he made another post saying, quote, "Took a day off, everyone. I don't really have anything more to add, except to mention to everyone that I've become aware that our protagonist is now aware of this thread. Say hi, everyone."
Ooh.
Gleefully, the rest of the forum members began to post messages to Catherine, mocking and teasing her, claiming to be soul-bonded to any number of characters or objects. That same day, however, an update was posted to the Final Fantasy House website. Quote, "I updated some stuff to make it slightly more legible. Evidently, housemate Horror's Sarah is not Rain Crystal. This comes to me via the writer of the Sarah saga. If you think he's lying or that I'm lying, that is your own business, but that is what he told me. Rain Crystal's behavior, soul bond nuttiness, getting money for
Did
it,
she
etc.,
change
is
her
similar
name
enough
to Rain
Sarah
Crystal
that she is
legally? Is that
harassing
what
the
it
writer
was?
to stop posting his lies about her. As such, I still think she's worth warning people about. I am sorry, but based on my experiences and the experiences of others, soul bonders are dangerous freakos." The
Freakos.
next day, Jägerhunde had a strongly worded reply. Quote, "This is actually a goddamn lie. Greta is a litigious-loving nut, and it sounds to me like housemate Horror Dude is doing damage control. I don't blame the Final Fantasy VII house author, since he's probably taking it simply on faith that our housemate Horror author is telling the truth. But he's not, and anyone who's read this far through the thread should see through this pathetic obfuscation pretty easily."
Oh, she's using big words.
In response to one person asking for clarification, Jägerhunde replied, "It would be irresponsible for me to say that Greta and her friends have their collective panties in a wad about the housemate Horror thing and have been pressuring the author to recant, so I won't. I'd like to add that it's possible that the housemate Horror author is a very elaborate troll, but even if he is, this is clearly someone who knows Greta, if it's her, of course, and while I'm willing to entertain the idea that some of the particulars might be fabricated, the fact that anybody you know, like maybe Greta, has possibly gotten so defensive about a series of stories, which even use false names, says much about that person." Unquote. Finally, on August 24th, in mid-afternoon, all parts of the story were removed from the housemate Horror blog Google Cache. The members of the forum were able to piece together all of the parts that had been written by Dragon Tiger Claw and
Wow.
archived on the forum, though it also had been saved on the way
People
back
on the
to
internet are
that same
crazy.
day, the
Like,
original Final Fantasy
how do they
House
dig
author
up this
posted an
stuff?
update to his website. Quote, "Well, what do you know? When something awful found Catherine Rain, things really heated up. The original writer of the Sarah saga got regular harassment until he took the story down. Considering the mind-numbing level of consistent details between Catherine's data and the data on Sarah, I'm going to agree with the goons. The OP was just doing damage control. It's obviously her. The current theory is, in one last-ditch effort to avoid more court battles with her, he deleted all the posts. Well, Greta, you stepped in it. You took away my train wreck that I was reading to defend your crazy cult. If he was writing fiction or not, you took away the fun. Thanks to something awful, we'll have lots of nice photos and links all here about you in just a little while." Unquote. This last update remains on the website to this day, and a link to the Sarah Saga thread on Something Awful is provided farther down the page. Now, the Final Fantasy House's website
For a long
and
time,
Sarah Saga
the Final
remain
Fantasy
as
VII
the
most
service
cringe
example of how the
ever.
online space collapses the distances between people, so that even old
Something
friends
about
with
that
no
game that
more
just, like,
existing ties can discover or
turned
stumble
people
across
into
one another with wildly
bootlicking
unpredictable
cucks.
effects.
I drew some dreadful Pokemon pictures in it too. Dude, if you made some Pokemon fanfic in '97, I would love to read that. Anyway, guys, that was the saga of the Final Fantasy house. Fantastic and fascinating tale. But we're going to watch the furry one now. So, let's see here. Oh, here we go.
Easily create your next video. Motion Array
Furry
offers more than
time.
500,000 templates, music.
In recent years, the term furry has come to be associated with a group whose identity and affiliations remain mostly vague. While many people seem to readily accept the moniker of furry, used as both a noun and adjective, there appears to be little to no unifying body nor statement of ideals that defines them. Still, the
Watch
artwork
reacting
that
to
pervades
his
this group is of
videos. He
definitively
likes to
cartoonish
strike
style,
videos
often using anime and
reacting
manga,
to what?
Disney
Who?
cartoons, and animated movies and television shows from the 80s and 90s for influences. While considered their own group, they are frequently found in other fandoms, adapting their furry interests to whatever other fandom or activity in which they are involved. Furry avatars are especially common on forums and social media sites. So what are furries? By the 1940s, Walt Disney Productions Limited had not only become incredibly profitable, but also ubiquitous in American culture. Throughout the 1930s, their movies and animated shorts had reached national popularity, and after America entered World War II, they were commissioned extensively to produce morphized animals directed towards a family audience,
Frederick
and their cartoonish, rounded style and
Kunsden?
target demographic became a
Kunsden?
standard for artists working on these sorts of characters.
Yeah, whatever.
This style was based off of similarly cartoonish humanoid depictions of animals, starting in the latter half
I don't
of
really
the
care if
1800s,
these
which would come
get
to be known
copyrighted
as
claim.
the
It's just,
funny animal
this is what I would be
But
doing
as this was occurring,
if
post-war
I wasn't
countercultural
streaming.
movements were taking notice of
So
the
I'm just
trend.
streaming because
One
I
of
like to
these
talk
was
with
the
everyone.
underground comics scene, stylized with an X, which often utilized
I
a
think
similar
Tifa
style to Disney's
was
family-friendly cartoons
was
in order to
every
parody
male's
it by
first
putting
game
original
crush.
characters into various adult
Plus, I know a
situations,
lot of female
almost
gamers who
always
were
involving violence, drugs,
still are
sex,
in
or
love
a
with Cloud.
combination of
Yeah.
the three. These would be printed and distributed by independent publishers, allowing them to avoid the content
probably true.
guidelines of traditional publications. The funny animals were not exempt from this treatment, and they would occasionally make appearances. One of these independent works, however, would reach a popularity beyond that of its contemporaries. A comic
Yeah,
strip
thanks for the
called
heads up.
Fritz the
It's
Cat,
not a big
which
deal to me.
began
I don't
printing
really
in
care.
1965. It depicted the eponymous anthropomorphic
YouTube will
character
strike you down
as
for
a
some
delusional,
reason
depressed
regardless,
philanderer
so
in a city
it's just
populated
the way
by
it is
other
now.
human-like animals. This character proved so popular that an 80-minute-long animated movie was created based on the intellectual property, independently produced and rated X, making a large return on investment. Inspired in part by Fritz the Cat, an independent project
Makes good
called
content,
Voodoo
though.
was
That's- I
proposed
mean, I
by
gotta give
very
'em that.
professional cartoonists. They explained their logic and plans in a proposal which they printed on February 29, 1976. Quote, Ken Fletcher and I, Reed Walker, have been talking about this for a long time, and we feel that comics today, both over and underground, are entirely too serious. So, Voodoo is being created as a showplace for
Yeah, I'm sure
irresponsible
the second I
silliness,
go
and since mass audiences aren't
offline
as
or
tolerant
off
of
live or whatever,
silliness as artists
this will
themselves
probably
tend to
have
be,
some sort
we
of
decided
like
to make
can't
it an amateur
monetize
press
sort of
association
thing.
rather than a
And I
magazine.
don't really care if
Do
it
you
does or
have,
not.
Or could you create for us a page or two of irresponsibly silly stuff which nobody else would
Just
have
chilling with the
patience to look
homies
at,
in the
preferably
stream.
without human characters? You see, the whole point of funny animal fandom, incorporating funny vegetables, funny minerals, and funny machines fandoms, is that humans in general are too serious. They get puffed up and self-important and full of this insatiable desire for impact and significance. Human characters are self-righteous, know all the answers, and are ready to enforce them on everyone else. We don't want all that seriousness here. There's already enough everywhere else. Well, anyways, we'd like to get funny animals back to the status they deserve, at least among fellow cartoonists. If you're like us, you owe funny animals quite a lot for the part they probably played in your development as an artist. He also explains their
He
distribution
has like
structure.
over 1
In
million.
an APA, the individual members send in identical copies of their publication to the official editor, sometimes called a central mailer or something similar, who shuffles the copies out into mailings that contain a copy of each contributor's publication, APA zine. The mailings are then distributed, one copy to each member. They detail their vision for the APA. We'd like Voodie to be a bi-monthly 8.5 by 11 volume dominated by cartoon art of all kinds with some personal news and mailing comments from the members. A place where you can just wig out without having to think about the usual market considerations. No censorship, mixed media, offset, Mimeo, Ditto, silkscreen, block print, silly putty, whatever you can think of. No requirements except that you keep those serious people as much out of it as possible. Humans are okay, but only when they're funny animals, too. Sex and violence is okay, as long as it's not human sex and violence." Unquote. The artistic demands for Voodie would be high, requesting work only from people whom they termed skilled cartoonists. The first issue would be sent to contributors in April of 1976. Though utilizing
Spock
an
is a
APA
monkey?
distribution structure for a visual medium hadn't been practiced before, advancements in photocopying technology meant that artists could make copies of their work both easier and cheaper than ever before. It proved a remarkable success among those admitted, but the exclusivity meant that many were unable to receive copies to some of those artists who had a greater interest in funny animals, and soon that enthusiasm would spread. In the early 1970s, a man named Mark Merlino had begun a tradition of collecting and showing bootlegged television shows at science fiction conventions in his hotel room. One night, at the first
He
Lost
looks like
World
that kind of
convention in
person.
Los Angeles in 1975, he performed a screening which included a number of Japanese animated shows aired on a local
Astro
television station
Boy.
in Hawaii. The giant robot shows proved especially popular, and the interest was so great that he founded a monthly club devoted to screening Japanese animation, which was named
The artist's demand for booty would be high.
CFO.
He was right.
At first, they only had access to bootlegs, but soon they created connections with people in Japan who had a special interest in old American shows, and the CFO would begin trading
Who
with
knew
them to
furry
receive
stuff went
high-quality
this far back?
videotapes of the newest Japanese animated shows.
Kashan.
Many of these enthusiasts who were attracted to Japanese animation had overlapping interests in the funny animal fandom, perhaps in part because of the frequency of characters with animal-like visual traits. This was likely encouraged by Merlino, who was a funny animal fan himself.
Is
and
this
would
the
even
man who
design a
started
funny animal
furries?
character to serve as the group's mascot.
Is he their god?
Some members would create stop-motion animation featuring her to serve as bumpers at CFO meetings. They also had an interest in spreading Japanese animation to the rest of America and increasing its popularity domestically. To do this, they created other, smaller clubs in cities around the country, though the two major ones would be the original in Los Angeles and another in New York City, with both animation and funny animal fans. As the CFO was growing, small, funny animal-focused independent magazines, or zines, were entering production. They would feature both visual art and writing, but the former proved much more popular and would soon come to dominate them, especially as photocopying
I didn't really know what
cheaper,
furries
more
were
accessible,
until I
and
was
of higher
like
quality. Unlike APAs, these
probably
zines
like in
were
my
available to
early
the public,
20s.
not only the contributing artists, and they helped strengthen interest in the fanfic at the outset of the 80s. The quality of the art would vary greatly, with work submitted by both professionals and amateurs of all skill levels, though almost all drew in a definitively cartoonish style. Here, the overlap between the anime and funny animal fandoms would become apparent, with much of the visual art
He's
featuring
that
style choices
that
and
balding
design clearly influenced
man
by Japanese
is
animation.
the furry
While
god.
no metrics have been gathered, it's likely that a majority of these zines include pornography of funny animal characters, and some zines consisted primarily of this sort of content, though the ratio of pornographic to non-pornographic artwork varied widely between each zine. Some of these zines would grow even more specific in their targeted content, focusing on niche groups within an already small fandom. Recognizing their reach, the CFO would soon begin advertising
sounds
in these
interesting.
zines, offering discounts for members at science fiction convention booths if they showed their membership card. But the CFO was not the only group forming around funny animals. In 1980, an artist named Steve Galacci attended the World Science Fiction Convention
Oh, is
held
this
in
the
Boston
prophet?
that year, where he submitted artwork of his anthropomorphic character Irma Felna.
Oh,
A number
yeah.
of the attendees enjoyed his artwork and began speaking with him, forming a small group around him and discussing funny animals.
It's-
He would
it's the
continue to
Messiah.
make artwork of Irma Felna and sell these at conventions, quickly gathering people around him each time. These interested parties would later meet at other conventions in what came to be known informally as Galachi groups, where they would share their interests with each other and form friendships.
The
For some
Galachi
time,
Messiah.
A sentiment had been growing in the funny animal fandom that there was a lack of funny animal media done in a more serious manner, and to meet this demand,
Yeah,
Galachi
I've
created
met and
Albedo
known
Anthropomorphic,
furries,
a comic anthology
not on
devoted to a more
that
serious treatment of
level,
funny animals.
but in a way where, okay, so like in my experience with furries is that they always like to say that it's not like a sexual thing as to why they're furries, but it is. In every instance that I've seen furry stuff or come across it or heard people talking about it, it always is about like the sexual part of it is why they're into it. I mean, why else? I mean, I like anthropomorphic humanoid creatures, whatever they're called, but not in like a sexualized way. I mean, sure, Lola Bunny from Space Jam, girl was thick. What can I say? Judy Hopps from Zootopia, girl was thick. But when you wear like the costumes and stuff, and I'm not like shaming anyone or whatever, you can be whatever you're into. That's when it gets a little bit weird for me. Like, I don't know, the costumes just kind of like, it just feels dirty.
Animals in 1983. Perhaps most notably, in issue 2, Albedo would publish the first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo, a now internationally
I actually
recognized
remember that.
intellectual property. Around this time, bulletin board systems, or BBSs, were beginning to grow in popularity. Acting as an early version of the internet, these message boards allowed users to share files and information, as well as participate in text chat over a phone line with the correct programs and hardware.
Yeah,
Though the price
good
of computers
times.
and the technical knowledge required to use them stymied their proliferation, they would see widespread usage among the funny animal fandom, which already shared many members with geek culture. One board in particular, the Tiger's Den, would quickly find that a majority
That is
of its
quite the
user base
setup.
consisted of funny animal fans, and so Mark Merlino would take ownership of the Tiger's Den and move the servers to his house. This BBS and others like it would help funny animal fans connect and share their interests, growing the fandom considerably and allowing them to coordinate and meet at conventions much easier. But soon,
Would I
these
bang a
groups
furry?
would grow in
Yes.
size at a rate that none at the time could have predicted.
It's gotta get sweaty in those costumes, dude.
At
They're
science
like
fiction
mascot
conventions,
costumes.
it
They're
was
not
common
even like,
practice for people to
I don't know,
host
they're just
small
creepy
parties in
looking
their
to me.
hotel rooms, often limited to artists who were presenting work at the convention. In 1985, however, at a convention called WesterCon, some attendees offered Mark Merlino and his partner Rod O'Reilly their room at the Red Lion Inn to use for a party, where they featured a special copy of the then extremely rare Animalympics TV special with other congoers. It was around this time that a new name for the fandom was disseminated, the furry fandom.
Oh, it
Mark
started.
Merlino at a convention panel explains his understanding of where this change began.
Bruce Pells and his plushy fans, who started calling themselves fuzzy fans
Fuzzy fans.
in the Losfus clubhouse. These are people who collected as a collection, not for any other reason. Okay? And this guy who called himself Dr. Pepper, this fan who really wasn't a furry to speak of. I mean, he would let furries into his D&D games. He didn't mind them, but he really wasn't a furry. Suggested that we were furry fans. He suggested the name, and it just kind of stuck.
Other people give alternative accounts of its
You can blame
inception,
D&D
however,
for the
no
word
definitive
furry,
origin has
everyone.
been discovered. This word would be used both as a noun and an adjective to describe those within the fandom and the anthropomorphic art core to it, calling the people within
I never
it
got to use it
furries.
either. That was
By the following
before my
year,
time. I was
room
born in
parties
'88,
based on
so
furry interests would become a regular occurrence at conventions, which became known as furry parties. What exactly
Fuck.
occurred at these parties is not documented, but the promotional material was suggestive. One flyer from RoseCon in 1988 depicts a naked
yeah, see, it was
anthropomorphic
always
furry
about
saying,
sex
"No, ma'am,
in the furry
morality
community.
and fandom
It was
party is
always
next
about
door."
sex.
Other
was never
promotional
anything other
material was
than
often of a similarly risque nature.
they
Eventually,
are
interest in these
sexualizing
parties
humanoid
grew to a
animal
point
creatures.
That the rooms couldn't contain them, and there was a belief that the fandom had grown large enough that the room parties could be turned into a convention.
Oh,
And so,
fuck.
to
Furry
test
con?
this theory, Merlino and O'Reilly reserved space with the Holiday Inn in Costa Mesa, California, to hold what they named Conference Zero. The convention was sparse, with basic events and nothing
You
resembling
guys are
a
fucking
celebrity
funny.
guest. Though only 65 people arrived, it was enough for the organizers to consider it a success, and they took
65
special note of the
people? Is that
fact
what he
two
said?
People dressed up as
Oh my
anthropomorphic
God.
animals,
Yeah,
including
see,
one
that's-
in leather fetish gear.
Oh man. Yeah, see, it's always been a sexual fetish. It was never anything other than that. Here's proof. What are we
The
watching?
following year, they held what they called the first real convention, and this one was far more successful, with double the attendance and featuring artists prominent among those who read the independent zines. Around this time, another important interpersonal
1990.
tool was being utilized by the furry fandom, the multi-user dungeon. Side note, in the 80s, multi-user
Ooh, we got a
dungeons,
mud.
MUDs, or MUDs, had proven an extremely popular
The
pastime
MUDs.
for computer users, acting as an early multiplayer experience that played
Hello, would you
and
like to see
looked
my
very
elephant
similar
trunk?
to a text-based adventure game. Users were able to change the world in ways that other players could experience, while also communicating through text. They connected through the internet, which was becoming more accessible around this time, using a protocol called Telnet. Mux proved to be a popular variant of MUD, especially for role players, due to the way that they were structured. They typically did not feature combat, but instead focused on building and interaction. End
Huh.
side note. In 1990, a
Furry
MUC specifically
muck,
for furries was
muck.
created, which they named Furry Muck. While this was the first furry-centered one, more were created in later years. They soon proved to be a
Conference.
popular method for furries to communicate and interact regularly with one another.
That's-
even over
that's-
great
that's a good
distances.
name.
Then, in December, a Usenet board specifically for furries was created, with a few others being made later under different tags. Here, furries were able to stay current with developments in the community and discuss further with each other. It quickly became a central part of the furry community, with many major members participating. Throughout the 90s, many smaller fan gatherings called fur meets would begin to form as well. Sometimes
Fur
with scarcely
meets.
more
That
than a
just
dozen
sounds
people, while
disgusting.
The conference continued to grow into the hundreds. The problems with such a large population appeared first in the early 1990s.
what is
Mark
that, Pepe Le
Molina
Pew?
describes these issues.
Now, to whip this back around to conventions, one of the things we had to deal with,
They
which helped
always
Montreal
act like
Hotel for more than 1 year,
like a
was
baseball
for
mascot
people who
character.
sabotaged
Like,
the convention anywhere they
you
could.
think that they would just act like normal people, but
And
they're
the
always like
original way
quiet
was
and like,
they would try to tell people, they'd call up the hotel
and it's, oh
anonymously and
god.
say, they're selling bootleg videotapes. And we actually had to deal with police.
All 65 of those furries shot
Convention,
Bambi's mother,
go through the dealer's room,
and then
looking
fucked
for
her.
people selling bootleg videotapes. Then after that, it was this is a convention for pedophiles. There are people selling, illegal underage art.
What?
And photos and movies and such in there, and you shut the convention down. And this still happens.
Holy
The furry
shit.
population increased even further with the proliferation of a new invention that was gaining popularity, the World Wide Web. This network allowed
So-
people who could afford it to create their own websites where they could
What?
post text and images. In an effort to
Dude,
give the fandom an
furries.
easier
Oh
way
my
to share
God.
artwork, a man named Brian W. Anton opened his private image hosting site,
Oh, Lord.
Valen Central Library, to allow others to upload their own works. Soon after, Fur Nation was opened with the same purpose of making art more accessible while also allowing for networking.
Pretty cool
Then, in
logo.
1996, a new virtual world was made available that catered specifically to furries, named Furcadia. What made it unique
Whoa.
was that it could be easily downloaded and run on a PC, and featured a colorful, isometric graphical interface.
That
both
doesn't look
factors
too
making it
bad.
Far more accessible
That looks
than the
very
text-based
nostalgic.
MUX. According to an interview with some of the game's producers, the population tripled yearly for the first 5 years it was available to the public.
Wow.
The proliferation of these online resources meant that, for a large portion of furries, the zines that had been so popular through the 80s were outmoded. For a time, the increased connectivity allowed furries to discover new zines and subscribe to them, but eventually, increasing internet speeds made it easier to upload higher quality images online.
Yeah, dude,
All of
seriously.
these factors together saw a rapid, exponential increase in people referring to themselves as furry, but with the increase in size came the inevitable problems that fandoms face, and they would be extreme. After the first year of conference, each successive convention would
Conference.
grow by more than 100 every year throughout the 1990s. However, as the crowd
Yeah,
grew,
it kind
the
of
convention
does.
gained more and more
I
of a
mean, it's got that old, like,
reputation for
Windows
wildness and
95
eroticism
PC
beyond
RPG
only
look.
the selling of pornography.
Uh-huh.
One man, by the name of Ed Klein, released an open letter to Mark Merlino on the Furry Usenet board on February 8, 1997, illustrating just how extreme the issue had grown at conference.
I would be
He opens
surprised if
with,
there wasn't a
"Mark,
furry sim
this letter
expansion.
is in regards to a serious problem that we encountered at Conference 8. I direct this letter at you personally because I assume you are still in charge and responsible for the convention in general. I say I assume because certain matters have made me question your authority regarding the running of this con. Mark, pay very close attention to what you're reading. I do not want any misunderstandings." Klein goes on to describe several incidents while he was at the convention. Quote, "On Thursday, the day of my arrival, on our way to get something to eat at the hotel coffee shop, we watched two young men deliberately waiting for what we saw to be mundanes see them, and proceed to deep-throat each other in a rather blatant manner in the hotel lobby.
What the
obviously
fuck?
getting a kick out of offending people. This went on for the period of time it took us to get across the lobby and into the coffee shop. They were still there when we left. Besides that, what the hell was one of your security doing walking around in drag? What's that got to do with the so-called premise of the convention, along with not aiding in the confidence people would be feeling in approaching security? That was very immature and unprofessional."
Oh my god.
After this, he describes a scene which has now become infamous in the furry fandom and was soon corroborated by other Usenet posters. Quote, "There was a situation in an elevator Saturday evening when I was taking some important guests back to my room for business. We were discussing said business in the elevator on our way up to the room when one of the gentlemen with me leaned back against the wall, as most people do, when he found his side and pants covered in semen. So his bottom feeder couldn't contain himself and squirted all over the wall." He then discusses his concern with the direction of the convention. Quote, "When did you decide to make this convention something other than anthropomorphic? What are you going to do about this lunatic fringe that is seeping into the convention? And understand this, I don't care whether they're alternative lifestylists or otherwise, or if they make love to their pets or any other preference. That's not what I'm addressing. What are you going to do about the people who aren't interested in attending this convention for its intended purposes? We overheard others on more than one occasion ask, 'What's a furry?' and receive the answer, 'I don't know, I'm just here for the parties and sex.' What are you going to do about these same people who are going about methodically ruining the reputations of the alternative lifestylists as well? And if you don't think there's a problem with this, you're not looking in the right places. Get your
This
head
shit
out of
is
your ass and clean
what?
up your fucking act. I'm not the only one that's pissed about this." He goes on to indict Mark Merlino for driving out the old regular attendees, but immediately afterwards, he talked about his experience at what had come to be known as pet auctions, and suggests he was allowing prostitution. Quote, "Gee, Mark, innocent, naive us. We thought it was going to be a pet auction, as in people in costumes and anthropomorphically inclined adopting others of similar interests for the benefit of charity. And it was nothing more than a queer auction.
Oh my
His job was to do a
god.
lap dance as Toshta, her zebra dancer, to the highest bidder. If she was offering this to a furry audience, she probably would have brought the house down. Instead, she got crickets. Know what this means, Mark? She went for $28. And yet, some little cretin in tight black shorts offering veiled sex went for $180. In fact, all those offering extras at the discretion of the pet sold for over $40. Mark, all of this came off as a thinly disguised excuse for pandering. You're lucky it wasn't shut down.
Holy
There was also
shit.
the fear that people with cameras were attending specifically to smear the fandom.
I redact my statement or previous saying that there's got to be some furries out there who really just enjoy like the subculture or alternative lifestyle thing, and it's not just about sex. But it, I don't know, man. It's This shit's just fucking wild. Let's get going.
Concern and frustration that had been building in the furry fandom for some time, and soon they would culminate into a moment that would help define more concretely
Con
what
used
it
to
meant
be
to
lit
a
in
part
Las
of the
Vegas,
furry
all
community.
crazy. Man, I remember hearing something of like a brony convention in Las
late
Vegas.
1998, a woman named Charlotte Trotman wrote a public letter online under the name Squee Rat, entitled
Squee
This
Rat.
Sordid Little Business, alternatively known as the Furry Manifesto, and it expanded upon Ed Klein's letter to apply it to the greater furry fandom. She opened with a strong indictment. Quote, I remember when being a pervert was a bad thing. If you were warped, you tried to hide it, and good for you if you did. If you were going to polish your raw autopsy photos or bugger a Shetland pony, you did it in the privacy of your own sick, sad home. No one else, especially not me, had to know, and that was great. The best part was, if you decided to crawl out on the roof and inform the neighborhood via midnight megaphone that being urinated on got you hot, you would be told in no uncertain terms how very diseased you were. Most people I know don't have too much trouble distinguishing between a lifestyle choice and a warning sign. Yep, in
Yeah.
many parts of the world, the idea of making love to Andy Panda is still regarded as somewhat misguided. Most parts, that is, except furry fandom. I don't know what the hell happened here. Apparently out of ignorance, she goes on to misattribute the origins of the fandom as entirely non-sexual. Quote,
It's
"To
true,
me
people
and a
will
lot
bring
of other
sex into
people,
anything."
Furry simply means a fondness for animal-human combinations in art, movies, books,
Definitely
whatever.
art,
If you're
definitely.
biased towards Redwall novels, have a soft spot for anime cat girls, or can't drag yourself away from The Secret of Nim, chances are excellent that you're at least slightly fur-inclined. That's pretty cool by me. The simple definition is probably what started furry fandom in the first place. She then goes on to list the groups in the fandom she finds particularly egregious. Quote, the most obvious one so far would be suspicions of bestiality. This wouldn't be a problem if the furs that did it weren't so damn proud of it. For those of you that were out sick that day in sex ed class, don't fuck your pets. Raping Fido is a 100% bad idea. You're making us all look bad, goddammit. Her second group of interest was also related to sex. Quote, as we descend just a step deeper into hell, we stumble across the path of the plushophile. That's shorthand for, I find this Miko doll intensely erotic. These are the people who use FAO Schwartz as a singles bar. I don't know who decided that this was a valid excuse for a sex life, but he probably still lives in his mother's basement. You don't have to earn a degree in psychology to figure out how thickly laden with sexual dysfunction the very concept of plushophilia is. She then attacked what were known as furry lifestylers. Quote, Glee, we've got us some self-righteous little pokers down here. You see, just drawing cartoon animals or enjoying Watership Down doesn't make you a furry. No, you're not good enough. You're not a furry if it's just a hobby. If you don't enter the astrally projected soul of a wolf trapped in a human body, or you don't answer the phone with a meow, you're not a furry.
Oh god, that would be so
Don't you
cringe.
feel terribly inferior now? Christ on a fire engine, what some people will try and force on you.
Oop.
Next, she speaks on those who attach New Age beliefs to the fandom. Quote, there are no werewolves. Anyone who claims to turn
Some
into a giant
people
dog at the whim of a
interpreted the
celestial
term
body should be
pussy wrong.
mercilessly
Yes, they
ostracized and
did.
laughed at with maximum cruelty. Her penultimate target, perplexingly, was vegans, using a naturalistic argument to decry their practices. Quote, for those of you who don't live in California, that's the total shunning of all animal products. No eggs, no leather, no beef, no fish, no clubbing baby seals until their skulls are soft and dough-like. For reasons beyond my comprehension, this sort of self-denial is supposed to put you more in touch with your...
Oh. Did that just like... What the fuck is wrong with my internet? I think it just restarted the stream. But if you are a true furry, but not vegan, that means you'd be eating... I mean, animals eat animals, right? I don't fucking know, guys.
have a strange way of mutilating other animals. That's nature.
I still haven't seen
Welcome to
Watership
it.
Down.
And there's nothing
The
more
animation
furry
looked
and
really
natural
kind
than
of
gnawing some
sketchy.
flesh, kids. Human beings are omnivorous, and that means meat. If you don't believe me, fetch yourself a mirror and smile. See those pointy things? Canines. So enough with the tofu and bean sprouts, your spirit animals are laughing at you. The last was shorter, taunting those who ardently wanted to be animals themselves. Numerous people in the furry community saw their own beliefs, concerns, and frustrations presented in Trotman's post. These concerns were founded in the scattered news stories that were beginning.
Many of those attending the conference here told us that being furry is just innocent child's
Bruh,
play.
you guys,
Adults
if
pretending to be
conference is still a
kids. A lot of what
thing,
goes on here is
we should go.
undeniably adult-oriented, and it's not for everyone.
Anyways, opening bid.
we'll
$2.
expose these
At the
freaks.
pet auction, for instance.
Oh my
furries
God.
bid for back rubs. And other pet services.
The motives that are involved
Ugh.
in different areas would tend to be a little bit controversial.
Why would you want to be
I
a
don't know
zebra?
about
Who
that
wants to be a fucking zebra?
And the furry strip show is definitely not kids stuff.
As far back
Oh,
as
no.
1994, local news outlets were beginning to write pieces on them. The March 1994 edition of Wired magazine wrote about those
fuck.
furries who used mucks. Quote, "Take furry muck, for instance, the first anthropomorphic mud. It makes Lambda Moo look like the young Republicans. People describe themselves as furry, cuddly animals. More times than not, they have furry, cuddly animal sex." Unquote. Apparently, enough support was shown to her that Trotman penned a second piece, which she titled A Modest Proposal, borrowing the title from Jonathan Swift's satirical essay. This writing, published on her personal website, reads so.
This is
Quote,
called
"Okay,
Void King.
so
What's
by
up, by the
now
way?
we all
This
know
is
I've been
called
complaining, but I've always been a fan of the fix
Conference.
it or shut up philosophy. Below is a small proposal as to how. Furry fandom is an embarrassment. There's no getting around that, but that doesn't mean it's beyond repair. There was a time when the designation furry didn't double for zoophile, plushophile, psychopath, or naturist. It used to be fun, and people used to know exactly where you stood when you referred to yourself as a furry. But these days, people hate being called as much. They cringe at the thought of being lumped together with the platoons of perverts who have decided to set up base camp under the guise of furrydom. A lot of
God
cool
damn it,
people
Zet.
have dropped out of furriness altogether, rather than be associated with or pressured by these nutballs. I still miss Abe Groder. Agony, agony.
It
I
took
wrote
me a
this
second
tape
to
as a
get that,
response to the
Zat, but that
massive
was
influx of
fucking,
support
that
for
was
the furry
grade A.
manifesto. Maybe there's hope for
That was
us after
primo.
all. Furriness needs fixing, and I think I may have an idea. It's not enough to distance ourselves from the previously mentioned.
Yeah, Void King. So
maniacs.
I'll just give you a little rundown real quick. So this is a documentary about furries, the origin, and what we're talking about right now is the convention aspect of the whole thing, and how it's less about being a furry and more about being a sex pervert.
Even if, by some miracle, the masses rose up and managed to expel every last wacko from the fan base,
I don't
the
know
name
how-
furry
blame
has taken
Scepter,
on
he
connotations
recommended
it will
this.
likely never shake. Common sense decrees a secession is in order. A subset needs forming, a group of furry types who want to make their interests known without being associated with the twitching crack babies and their crazed notions. I did a little brainstorming and came up with this. Burned fur. The name, grasp on reality, would clearly feel slighted by the screamingly deviant direction the fandom has taken. Another way of looking at it is the example made of furs who have spoken up against fandom perversion and been burned at the stake for it. Eric Bloomrich is the best example. There are others, of course. Once the manifesto is posted to Alt Lifestyle Furry, I'll probably end up being one of them. End quote. This plan was quickly enacted. The burned furs established themselves on message boards
The
as a
burned
loose coalition of
fur.
furries, and they had the support of many prominent members of the community who were both personally frustrated with the fandom and concerned about its public image. However, even with the positive momentum behind them, they would begin to face trouble almost immediately. Trotman's proposal attracted many who were concerned about the state of the furry fandom, but their goals were ill-defined. New members would join who defined degeneracy differently from Trotman. The point of greatest contention was the belief that the sexualization of furries was a reprehensible activity, and there was a sentiment that artists who did so were violating their artistic integrity. This was in spite of the official Burned Fur website stating that they were not against furry pornography or sexual role-playing. Since the movement was so decentralized and their founding texts so vague, anybody, including these new members, could speak for the group, and they came to be associated with anti-homosexuality and prudishness. Even
Uh-oh.
so, their influence would be felt in the core of the fandom. In 1999, Mark Merlino gave control of Conference to a man named Daryl Exline, who made himself known as a burned fur shortly after taking possession of the convention. Many online furries were skeptical about the convention's future. Despite the mixed reception of the burned furs, other prominent furries began to join and offer their support, and one of the most publicly visible was a man named Eric Bloomrich, the same person mentioned in Trotman's A Modest Proposal. Bloomrich would quickly become known as one of the most vocal members of the burned furs and a critic of the furry fandom. His stance had been well known for some time before the burned furs were created, but compared to Trotman, his vision for the fandom was much more restrictive and directed. On October 30th, 2000, he made a statement on a furry Usenet board that would come to be associated with him in the fandom.
Oh,
Though
the
he opens
innocent
by stating
days.
that the writing was his alone, he quickly
Man, I was watching
abandoned this
hentai in
as
like
piece
fucking
and
middle
invokes
school.
the entirety of the burned furs. It reads in part, quote, "I warned that if the world at large should encounter our fandom through these elements, the fandom would be irreparably damaged, tainted as a haven for the sexually degenerate. I warned that the proliferation of pornography depicted to the world a fandom aberrant and despicable. Squeerat's manifesto led to the formation of a core group with no ideology, no cohesive structure, other than the common desire to bring about a change in the fandom. We didn't go far enough, fast enough. Our opponents were so brazen and so ubiquitous that our efforts, restricted as they were to the internet and a few cons, were unable to maintain and thicken the dangerously thin veil that separated our tainted fandom from public scrutiny. We saw that on The Daily Show. There he was, Kevin Duane, proudly displaying his filth to the prying cameras of Comedy Central.
Wow.
Well, in the wake of recent events, it has become clear that this will not do. We must acknowledge our bully pulpit and take on the forces that would destroy our fandom by name. We must have the courage to mount the ivory tower, accept the uncomfortable mantle of authority, and state unequivocally our accusations against these foul excuses for human beings. These people need to be
I've been not really working on one, but I've just had like an idea in the back of my head for like kind of like a documentary-esque sort of video that I've been wanting to do. If you guys would like to see anything like that, let me know.
exposed for what they are. They must be hounded, persecuted, and driven
Oh.
back into the maggot.
You guys remember vampirefreaks.com? It was like a dating website for like seen emo vampire kids. Yeah, I was there.
Depths from which they emerged. Until they are, we cannot hope to make any progress toward the rehabilitation of the fandom they so gleefully and selfishly destroyed. He then goes down a list of people, but the first was Mark Merlino, one of the founders of Conference. Quote, "I accuse Mark Merlino, who masterminded the debacle that was Conference 3, advertised almost exclusively through gay and lesbian resources. The man who came up with the egregiously
Vampirefreaks.com.
vile decision to give every confirmed member of
Oh,
Furry
those
Club
were the
a free
days.
pass to the con." He goes on to indict other individuals for creating and selling pornography, calling one
It
a
was a documentary about, because I grew up at a time where vampire kids were huge, and I was friends with a few of them, and I just like thought it would be kind of a cool idea to, I don't know if it's already been made or not, but make a documentary type video of vampire kids like from back then, like, because you don't really hear about that anymore. Like, I don't know, if you were born after like the year 2004 or 5, if you were born like, yeah, after 2005, you just really didn't hear about it. It was a thing up until probably like 2010 maybe, and then it just kind of went away.
the dollar and accusing another
Really
of selling
weird, interesting
pornography
shit,
to
though.
children. His last targets, which he called the most despicable of all, were those members of the fandom who hadn't spoken on the subject. He closed by comparing himself to Martin Luther King and John Raba, while calling Mark Merlino a demon. The reaction from the furry Usenet board was aggressively negative. Bloomrich was immediately attacked for his hyperbole and apparent misunderstanding of the sexual
It's
nature
true.
of the
They only
fandom
come out
from
at
its
night.
inception, and being called out for his hip-hop partner,
Yeah, I think that'd be
Rod
fun.
O'Reilly,
I'll do
later
something like
defended
that.
Merlino.
Just takes a
Right
while
off the bat,
because I'm lazy.
you know, we might as well get into it because people are gonna think about it. But
you know, people started noticing, lo and behold, hey, guess what? There are LGBT people showing up at our furry conventions. And there are certain people whom that created a panic. Because, you know, what are these LGBT people doing at our perfectly heterosexual fandom? And you're like, what? But and then they're like, we see. You gay guys invited all of these weirdos in. You wrote them letters all personally and said, hey, come to our convention and make it perverted. And we're like,
By 2001, identified with the movement anymore, pushed out by the rest of the community. While numerous people in the furry fandom still had their concerns, the Burned Furs nor any copycat group would have the same sort of sway they did. However, new technology and services were about to irrevocably change the fandom in a way that would have made it nearly impossible for the Burned Furs to achieve their aims, and perhaps made it unnecessary.
No, man, thrifting's been fucking dry. Like, I have some
In the early
footage,
2000s,
just
the internet
not as
was
much as
seeing
I
rapid
want.
expansion in terms of
One will come out
accessibility
soon,
and
though.
speed. Personal computers were gaining increased storage capacity and processing power.
I had
and
that exact
scanning
same, this
technology
compact
was
right here.
becoming more detailed
I had
and
that.
widely available. These factors together would see a widespread increase in internet usage and digital image creation. Users could now also share images much more easily with one another, and furry artists would begin to use it frequently for this purpose. Digital artistic tools quickly found even more widespread usage among furries as well, being an ideal form of art for the internet. This process was expedited by image hosting websites being created and made available for free. The earliest was a
Perfectly
powerful tool for
heterosexual.
amateur artists at the time as a place they could upload and share their art. Since more and more furries were using the internet
Oh,
to
who
communicate
mentioned
and
DeviantArt?
communicate, DeviantArt proved to be an
Who
ideal
mentioned it
choice for them.
in the chat?
However, there was one important limiting factor for the furry community. DeviantArt would allow nudity, but not pornography. Around that same time, another private project called YIFStar was being created to replace the
YIFStar.
old image archives being used to house furry artwork. The word YIF meaning anthropomorphic sex in the furry community. This website
Is that what it means?
DeviantArt, but
I never knew
specifically
that.
furry artwork and with no content restrictions. Soon after, other image hosting sites based around anthropomorphic artwork would appear, such as Sheezy Art in 2003 and Fur Affinity in 2000, just repositories of anthropomorphic art. Due to the popularity of DeviantArt, however, many furries would continue to use the platform, sometimes in concert with other platforms.
DeviantArt is
Eventually,
still
furries
going,
became
too.
so prolific on the site that in 2006, a specific category for anthropomorphic artwork was created, establishing furries as a core demographic of the platform. Due to the new ubiquity of the internet, more and more furries were accessing both these new online resources as well as old ones.
This game
such
does
as
look pretty
Wikipedia.
cool, though.
The increased
I would totally play
connectivity of the
this if it
internet
wasn't
was
a furry
also
game.
making it possible for furries to communicate, advertise, and organize new
Midwest
conventions
Fur
and